welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 70, you're in for a real treat because this is actually a two-person podcast episode. We're joined by Dr. Janine and Scott from the Healthy Behavior Institute. And Dr. J is a psychologist by training, and Scott is a fitness professional, and they've brought their collective expertise together to bring behavior change science to fitness and personal training. I think this is a fascinating conversation of two worlds that can work very synergistically together to not only make for a more impactful business for clients, but also a more sustainable and profitable business. Both Dr. J and Scott are very knowledgeable, they're very passionate, and they've been in the trenches doing this for some time with some incredibly great reproducible results, not just with their own clients, but with businesses and with personal trainers they've been working with. So a wealth of knowledge in this episode for all of you that are listening. There'll be some great links to share from Dr. J and Scott on the show notes page that can be found by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 70. Please enjoy this conversation with Scott and Dr. J. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Scott and Janine from Healthy Behavior Institute. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure.
Thanks for having us on.
So I'm excited about this because this is actually the first podcast that we will be doing with two people at the same time. So this should be kind of novel, but I think, as an audience, you're going to see why it was so important to have both of these professionals on here at the same time. So Dr. J, we're going to start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so my doctorate is in behavior analysis, which just is the applied version of human behavior change. And so for the last couple of decades, I've been a researcher and I've been an educator and a clinician, all in the areas of helping people change their behavior towards the goals that they want. So I come from a very strength-based perspective. And so it's really about where are you now? Where do you want to go? How do we take your personalities and your strengths and move that needle? And so I've worked with businesses and organizations and clearly in the fitness industry for the last decade. And I'm really just excited to add that behavior science to this space.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been such a missing piece. And I think that's something that Scott realized. So Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background before we kind of dive into this collaboration a little bit more?
Yeah, so I've been personal training for almost 18 years now, been a gym owner for the last 12 years, running behind today because I was working with clients. I still have my personal training shirt on. And so it's one of those things that I'm still in the trenches working with people. I'm one of these guys that I'm going out and trying to learn from anybody and everybody out there. And actually, Dr. J became a client of mine about 10 years ago. And having some discussions there, I'm like, man, this is a missing piece that we have in the fitness space because I'm learning all the time about nutrition or supplementation or exercise execution or program designs or just all these different things. But all that stuff without getting to know kind of the why behind people or behind the habits and behaviors is really kind of a big missing link. And so when we started just talking and, during training sessions, as many of you know, is working with someone, just learning all about that. I was like, wow, this is some really important things I think more people need to learn about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is kind of the missing link. And, I always like to say that you could write the most perfect program in the world, but if it never gets implemented, it doesn't help anyone. And I think you guys have developed a really unique partnership. And we had a chance to have a great conversation a couple of weeks ago about what you guys have developed. Talk a little bit more about kind of how this thing that you guys have built has evolved into something that is more than just operational model you're using internally, but also something that you're now trying to proliferate to the rest of the industry.
Yeah, so this is something that we built a course on. We work with other personal trainers, other coaches, dietitians, gym owners, and it's really taken our both combined experience, and that's what makes us very unique. Like I have almost 20 years of working in the fitness space, and she has over 20 years working in this behavior change and also knowing the science behind it. Because a lot of times you see in this industry of people, they might want to know one or they might know the other, but
Sure.
us, starting these conversations almost a decade ago and really working on, okay, what are the systems that we can use on a everyday basis? What's the systems that we can put in place when, like I have a team of trainers and we just had a couple of new trainers in, and we have to educate them on having these types of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course we need to teach them about exercise and movement, but also like what's holding people back? What are the root causes of unhealthy behaviors, and how do you have these conversations? So it's really kind of changing that dialogue so they can, so clients aren't feeling so pressured that it's all in or all out, and they know how to make changes, and really it's kind of putting that system in place. So coaches, even at a young age, or we're seeing a lot of experienced people just seeing this frustration, knowing how to have these conversations and see long-term changes in clients.
Yeah, a big part of our emphasis was, and in my experience over time, I've trained so many people on how to use core principles of behavior science. And it's not, sometimes people have this notion of, oh, is it like psychology? And then I'm going to get into people's personal lives, and now I'm a therapist. And there is a whole field of that. And yes, you can go very deep in your education and understanding, but there's also just some core behavior change principles that anyone can execute if they understand the system and have one to do that. So a big emphasis for us was not just to educate people about the need for this, but again, as Scott pointed, to just create some real clear systems that fit the fitness facility, fit the coach's daily structure, that can be done virtually or in person. And so that was a big emphasis for us, and why we're excited to continue to share that with other practitioners.
So stay on that concept of those core behavior change principles. And on a super high level, Dr. J, how would you explain that to the fitness professionals that are listening?
Well, so, like Simon Sinek is real popular for the start with why. Yeah. And on a big, just simple perspective, it's really what we're talking about is a lot of people talk about changing habits or stopping doing something or all of those types of things. But what you really have to understand is any behavior that is persistent. If you have a habit, or your client has a habit that they want to change or move, and they've been doing it for a while, they're doing it because it serves a purpose. So no behavior continues when it's not serving a purpose or a root cause. So the big concept here is we need to figure out why they're doing, what that root cause is. Is it to escape my stressful day? Is it to connect socially with others? Is it to just reward myself, tangible? Or is it just because it feels good, sensory? And if I know that, then all of these amazing strategies that coaches and facility owners have for clients, we can match them better, as opposed to sort of throwing noodles on that cupboard wall and seeing what sticks. And so that's kind of a big core principle. And also in behavior science and just human behavior, we need to make changes in small incremental steps. And so I would say, so we talk a lot about minimal effective dose on what's the minimal that we can ask someone to change or adjust, and how do we sustain it and then build on to those next things. And so I would say, in a quick answer, those would be two core concepts.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And, Scott, you and I have a similar background. I come from a career in personal training, and I can't help but think how that's almost the antithesis of a lot of kind of what's taught in just general personal training. It's, hey, let's work out 5 days a week. Let's try to get this body fat off in, 30 days. It stays very, very surface level for the most part. So I understand why you heard this and you were like, wow, this is kind of a bit of a missing link in my business. But I'm curious for you as the business owner here is, how do you actually operationalize this into your business? Because everything that Dr. J just said was amazing, but you have to get that from her head and her lips to your people, to clients. So how does that actually happen? Again, high level.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is you have to have the time and space to have these conversations.
Yeah.
We are big on not having these on the gym floor in
Mm.
between exercises when someone's, tired, blood sugar's low, like, they're just trying to catch oxygen. Like, we don't want to have those. Like, you can definitely have conversations on the floor to kind of reinforce what you're having, but to have these deeper conversations and figuring out the person's why, figuring out their unhealthy behaviors, being very specific with their goals. We have set times for all our members. So we're mainly one-on-one personal training. We do some small group training as well. But part of our membership model, this is the price that we built in there, is they get a monthly session with us to go over these things. We also have some people that come in and they just meet with us on a weekly or monthly basis that train at other facilities because the other facilities aren't doing this. We have some people that just call in because they don't live in our area and they can't physically come to our spot. And we have some people that aren't ready to start training yet. And this is their own words. And this is something we've all made fun of as coaches when we hear someone like, well, I want to join your gym, but I'm not in good enough shape yet. But instead of, making fun of that, like having a service for them. So they come in and we talk, and it might be something of like our activity goals for that week is just increasing their steps. And then we're kind of looking at, what's deficient in kind of what they're doing in the sense of like, it could be sleep, it could be water, it could be protein intake. And then also looking at some of those unhealthy behaviors defined by, kind of how they're progressing in their goals and figuring out some of the replacements for that. One thing that I talk about is, this is me as a young coach. I see a lot of young coaches doing this of like telling people, we'll just cut it out. If you really want it, just cut it out. Like I can eat out of Tupperware and work out every day. That means you can too. You just want it more. But our clientele are coming with different life stressors, different priorities. And so having this minimal effective dose and finding these replacements for unhealthy behaviors, we're just seeing a much greater impact with this. So this gives us the time and space to have these conversations. So it provides way more value to our clients. And then also it's a built-in price point in our memberships. So our coaches actually get paid more during that time than they do on the one-on-one personal training, because we technically charge more for that service than we do for the one-on-one training service, because it's something that everybody needs and very few people around are doing.
Yeah. And I think what you said there was so important, because most of the time that coaching does happen in between sets, and how high quality is that whatsoever. I mean, you talk about active listening and reflections and all the things you would want to do to have a good coaching conversation. How's that happening in between sets of squats and burpees? Like, I know I'm not paying a lot of attention if I'm doing those kind of things. So I feel like part of that is, something that is almost a necessity. So those coaching sessions, and Dr. J, I want to come back to something important in a second that he talked about around the thought of the trainer that, hey, well, I'm doing this, you can't do this too. But for you, Scott, in terms of like the structure of those coaching sessions, you said they're about every month. How long do those sessions last? What are you guys typically doing in those sessions?
So we have those sessions that's 15 minutes long.
15,
we like to keep
15 or
15, 1-5.
Okay.
Because we, like Dr. J said earlier, like we're not trying to turn these into therapy sessions. Like we don't want, 45 minutes to an hour just talking about all your problems. We have a quick and effective system of like, all right, here's what we want to talk about. Here's what we want to get out of it. And here's what we want you to walk away with. Sure. And, since we're starting with kind of minimal effective dose, whether you're meeting weekly or monthly based on that person's needs, it's one of those things that we're going to meet again here soon. So this is like, the biggest thing that I see is that the fitness industry on making improvements is having more time on coaching people on not what they're doing just inside the gym and physically, because that's what the emphasis is now. It's also coaching them on what they're doing outside the gym. So we have an assessment where we're going over stress management, we're going over relationships, we're going over health, we're going over happiness, we're going over all these different categories. Because really, some of these factors, say stress management, if someone's super stressed and we're telling them to count their calories and go for restriction, all this stuff, that's just going to add more stress. So they're not ready for that sort of plan. Even though if we know if you work out really hard and you cut your calories down, you'll lose the weight. But some people aren't ready for that approach. So we might do some stress management techniques with them. And when we talk to young coaches about this, they get really worried. Like, I don't want to talk about someone's stress or relationships, something like that. All we really do in those short conversations is talk about like, what do you do for fun? Yeah. Or what can we do to on a daily or weekly thing to find ways to de-stress from that. So some people it's playing guitar, and some people it's getting back into, some of the old habits. And some people it's just, finding 15 minutes that they can have alone, that their husband's watching the kids or something like that. So it's really setting up this foundation for people to have good success long-term.
Yeah. And so to that point, Dr. J, and I find it really interesting, what he said there about trainers, especially young trainers, being concerned about, hey, I don't want to do therapy here. That's, not what I got into this for, and I don't feel qualified to do it. So what I'm curious to ask you about, and I'll ask it in two parts. First part is, what do you notice about kind of like I'll call it the maturity gap that exists between most fitness professionals and the populations that they work with? I mean, I see the average fitness professional is 20 to 25 years old. The average client is, 45 to 60 years old. There's a gap there that exists, right? And so I'm assuming that when you're coaching trainers, you work to address that gap. So speak to that for a second, because this is what I always find is one of the biggest challenges of coaching young coaches to coach, is just the gap that exists.
Yeah. And there's several things I want to highlight with that. And I love that question, because part of what Scott was talking about in the sense of, these 15-minute sessions and things like that, we really have it written down or processed is, here's session one, your very first session with someone. Here's these, 3 or 4 things that you're going to talk about. Here's session 2, here's session 3, meaning each person has their own individual path, but here's sort of the topics. Here's how to get outcomes out of those and move to the next step. And that's very different than some of the things that we encourage coaches to do nowadays. And part of it's like with motivational interviewing, which I have nothing against and I'm a fan of. However, to your point, if I'm 25 and I'm doing motivational interviewing with a 55-year-old and I'm just asking more questions and they are giving me a whole lot more information and I have no clue what to do with that, what we've done is 2 things. Is we've misrepresented expectations, because if I'm asking you this question, it would assume that you might have an answer. And that's kind of not what we're doing. Right. And the other part is that I feel like heightens that gap. Yeah. So to that end, in 2 things that we've done that I know and that we've done to sort of help ameliorate that is, instead of looking at always as ages, the first thing I want people to do is think about it as how people are wired based on their personality. So I need to understand that the way that I'm naturally wired may be different than you. What I value might be different than you. Because whether you're 25 or when you get to the point of 55, the things that are important to you and the way that you think about things, there's some consistency to that. Yeah. Again, maybe small children are as important to me until I have my own or things like that. But overall, how I'm wired, and Scott and I are wired very differently. We complement each other in the way that we function. But the way that he needs me to communicate with him sometimes to be more effective is different than how I might naturally, and vice versa. Yeah. So one of the things that we've done for trainers, and at least in our system, and we've done it because I think it's important, is we have an assessment called Communication Insights. You do it the first time with a client, and they feel, and it takes like a minute and a half, and they help prioritize a couple of key areas. And then what it translates to for the trainer is, this client needs to, for example, this client needs to know the why. So you need to explain the why behind any strategy you do and whatever. I need to know that. Another client, they don't want to know the why. Tell me what to do and how this matches my goals. Yep. Another client's like, make this efficient or I've stopped listening. And so if a trainer, if a fitness professional has that information right off the bat, I can recognize that, we have people that have very chatty personalities and other people that have less. And right away, nope, this person doesn't want me chatting at them. I need to give them efficient, effective, and move forward. So that's a big part of it, is understanding how people are wired, and without having to have a psychology degree. So this assessment just sort of plugs at that. Then the other part is that when we're talking about whether it's exchanging some foods or adding movement or those type of things, I don't need to be walking in your shoes, but I have to ask you questions about your lifestyle. So we had a coach or a trainer that we were working with, and he was referencing sort of some patterns that some of his clients had. And they were saying, well, I got kids and it gets distracting and I eat their snacks. And he's like, well, don't have any of those snacks in the house and that'll simplify it. Well, he doesn't have, apparently he's not raising kids and doesn't understand that that's a pretty complex ask, right? But instead, tweaking and just finding out when they do have time for themselves, when they're adding one more thing. So just listening to their lifestyle and then being able to match some of those strategies. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but those are the couple ways that I think about it.
Yeah, well, yeah, to a degree, you've almost made it algorithmic on some level. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to do this, and here are some of the guardrails, and then we're going to do that, and then here are some of the guardrails. And I feel like that helps keep the coach feeling safe in the process to wade into those waters, because without the guardrails and the processes, I mean, it would be very daunting for even a somewhat experienced coach to start to ask some of those questions.
Yeah, and we've seen that too, because so many people that come into the space, like they've been doing a barbell back squat in their personal life for the last 10 years or so. So like teaching someone to do this, so like I feel very confident on how to do this, but now we're like, all right, sit down with someone and talk about kind of like the stuff that they're doing at home that's affecting their overall health. It seems like daunting. So that is a little hurdle that we're getting over, of just getting people of like, hey, it's not that complicated. You don't have to be a PhD to be able to have these conversations. If you can, again, we have a system of ask the right questions, because really to get the right answers, like I won't have the answer for these clients. It's asking the right questions, and they all have it. It's just asking them the right questions, and then it will come up. Because it's when she talks about the unhealthy behaviors. So if someone comes in and we're talking about weight loss, and we've gone up through a lot of goal clarification and specified why we're doing that. And when we're talking about like, okay, what are your big caloric offenders? Almost everyone's like, oh, it's X, Y, or Z. Like right away, they're like, oh yeah, I eat late snacking, or I'm drinking, or I eat out a lot, or whatever it is. And then we talk about, we get into the root cause for that unhealthy behavior. And Dr. J talked about it earlier. We use the acronym EATS: escape, attention, tangible, and sensory. I just write those 4 up on the board, and right away they're like, oh yeah, it's escape. Or on the weekend, it's the attention, it's hanging out with people. And so since we know why they're doing it, we can find the proper replacement. Because, and I said this earlier, the young coach is like, just stop doing it, which isn't super helpful. The somewhat more advanced coach, and this is how I was before I met Dr. J, it was like, I gave replacements, but they were guesses. And a lot of my replacements were actually sensories, because someone's like, I'm drinking in the evening. I'm like, oh, well, let's do some kombucha or some tea or something like that. And I'm like, that only works well if they were drinking the alcohol because of sensory. But if they're looking for escape, like kombucha is not much of an escape if you've had it before. So just match that up.
Yeah, indeed.
And the other thing I would also add is just sort of a mindset shift for coaches on this. You're having a ton of conversations already on the floor, and a bunch of them are personal.
Yeah.
So this notion of like, oh God, I don't want, like, you overhear and people share. Now they only share what they want to share, but some people share some pretty interesting or deep or intense things. And so you're already having these conversations. What we're doing is saying, let's keep the physical movement where it needs to be and focus there, bring these conversations into a different setting. And then also by giving a system and a structure that we know works based on behavior science, and by doing this for the last X amount of years, then that also allows you to actually contain those conversations a little bit and then be more consistent. Because you pointed out, Michael, earlier that when you're doing it on the training floor, you also have to remember what you suggested last week or the last time they were in. And 30 clients later, how much are you remembering about that, right? So then there's that risk that you're like, well, you try this. Yes, we talked about that 2 weeks ago. Okay, well, try this. And so it's just really creating a better system for that for both parties.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you more about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has been absolutely devastating for the fitness industry, with upwards of 1/3 of our clubs closing nationally on a permanent basis. One of the few stabilizing forces during this very tumultuous period of time has been IHRSA, the Global Trade Association for the Health and Fitness Industry. On my crusade to make fitness professionals part of our healthcare continuum, the work that IHRSA is doing is absolutely vital. They provide advocacy and lobbying support at both the federal and the state level. They support state alliances in many ways, And they also provide resources and best practices to club owners, operators, and individual fitness professionals. Indeed, if we are truly going to become part of the healthcare continuum, we must speak with one unified voice. We must have best practices that we implement, and we must come together as an industry to ensure the public, the medical community, and lawmakers hear our message loud and clear that movement is medicine and it is essential. That is the work that IHRSA is doing. They've recently revamped their membership structure, allowing large clubs, small clubs, boutiques, and individual professionals to join the organization for an appropriate price that allows them to have access to all of these many great resources and allows us to unify and amplify our voice as an industry. For more information on the amazing work that IHRSA is doing, go to their website, IHRSA.org. That's IHRSA.org, IHRSA.org, to look in a little bit further into the work IHRSA is doing to unify our industry, to move us closer to being a part of that healthcare continuum. Now back to today's episode. Yeah. And Scott, she just said it. I mean, you guys have been doing this for a long time. And there was a period of time prior to meeting Dr. J, you weren't doing this. Talk about some of the, and they could be examples or anything you have on the big difference that you've noticed, pre to post. At the risk of asking an obvious question, I'm sure things are better and outcomes are better. But, is there any specific anecdotes or any specific outcomes that you can point to and say, wow, like this really helped impact, this in this way?
Yeah, so I would say more of lessening the frustration on both sides.
Oh, okay.
Because so much of it, and I heard of many of coaches, and I said it like, if the clients would just listen to what I said, they would get the results they wanted.
Yeah.
And this is something I've said before. This is something I still hear from coaches. They're like, why aren't they listening to that? So we get frustrated because we're like, they say they want to lose weight. They're showing up and they're paying good money, but all they have to do is the simplest things to get the results. And so us as coaches, like, especially early on, like, we take their results as like a indicator of how good we are.
Yes.
And the other side, on the client side, they get frustrated because what the coach I am telling them seems very simple. And then they think, well, I don't have the willpower to do it. I don't have the discipline, or I'm just not wired to be that way. So I'm just going to quit and just, in lack of better terms, just be fat and happy.
Yeah.
Because I've heard him say that before.
Yeah.
And so really it's not everyone's going to be a huge transformation client.
Right.
As a young coach, you realize that pretty quick.
Yeah.
And usually the big transformation clients like to transform back and forth if you follow them long enough. So it's more about setting this path of like, listen, we might not lose the most weight you've ever had in the next 30 days, but we're setting up a plan that you can continue for the rest of your life. And me as a coach, I'm going to be happier with it because I'm meeting you where you're at and we're making progress forward. And you as a client, you're going to be happier with it because you're seeing some progress without just feeling defeat and, kind of like because I've never had someone tell me like, well, it's your fault. I'm not losing. You're not giving a good enough plan. They're like, it's my fault. But ultimately, looking back at it, if I would have had some of these strategies, I could have helped more people.
Yeah, and it does mitigate the frustration on both sides. And I'm so glad you said that, because I think everybody listening can imagine how this is going to result in better long-term outcomes for people. But the frustration is something that I think is much more subtle. And I know from the side of the fitness professional that eats at you, particularly when you're early in your career. Yep. And you feel like it's your fault that someone's not getting the outcomes. And I often wonder how many people leave the profession because of that level of frustration. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Dr. J, I have a question for you kind of with regard to scope of practice. So, you're teaching these coaching skills to people, and invariably some things will come up during these conversations that might be red flags where, okay, this is a little outside of my scope. And I'm always curious to ask mental health professionals how to handle those type of situations with regard to identifying it, possible referral, because the very nature of what you're talking about, sitting down in an office and coaching health behavior change, stuff's going to come up. So how do you, on a high level, suggest that fitness professionals handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a big way that we talk about it is that the fitness professional can really serve as this fitness guide, for the complete fitness journey. And guide doesn't mean that you have all the answers. It truly means that you're a guide. So the big answer is you address it by being proactive in the sense that who's your network? So do you have chiropractors in your network? Do you know some psychologists or psychiatrists in town? Or even now, there's so much online mental health opportunities that you've heard good things about, or other clients have used successfully, or things like that. And obviously don't share who those clients are, but you start to create that network of providers that you can sort of refer out. And ideally, when you can, you're even connecting to those providers and saying, hey, if I have some clients that have this, are you the appropriate person to, or what kind of people would I refer? And that's not bad for business, right? Because now you have a kind of this dual kind of referral back and forth. But more importantly, you can say to clients, I'm hearing you. I'm really sorry about that death in your family, or I'm sorry you're still struggling with this. It's not an area that I'm familiar with, or that's not my expertise. I want to be here to support you, but I can refer you out. But the big thing is that and I say, I've been alive long enough to say this, is with the sort of internet explosion during my adulthood, I hear more and more people do sort of what we call that armchair psychology of like, oh, they've got this, or they throw a label or diagnosis. And the thing that I always recommend is avoid that. Their diagnostic criteria is very complex. There's whole books and experts on it, and you can't imagine how many different diagnostic areas there are and labels. So instead of making a determination, just be proactive and have a network of people ideally that you can refer to. And if you don't, and sometimes you don't, even I don't, I get asked a lot, do you know a good psychiatrist? Do you know whatever? Well, depending on where you live and what the situation is, sometimes I'm like, I don't know anyone offhand. But the other thing to do, what I do though, is, for example, I know the American Psychological Association has a great website that people can put in where they live, what kind of help they need. And those people are vetted through APA, and I've kept up on their licensure and all those things, no guarantees, but I can send them there. So things like that, and be thinking about that. You learn as you go. But to your point, in no way are we saying practice outside the scope, but just taking those conversations you normally have and having a better system to answer those. And then when it's past that, then you refer out.
Yeah, and that's great. Now, being proactive about developing your network, I think, is such an important thing. And it's a two-way street. And like you said, it's never bad for business. You refer someone to a chiropractor because they need an adjustment. The chiropractor is probably going to refer somebody to you, when they need exercise. There's that reciprocity that's there. And so I think that that's such an important point. And I'm glad we had a chance to talk about that outlet. This is something, and the thing that I love about what you guys have created, and this is very much aligns and resonates with me, is you guys have built something really amazing, on this micro level. Now you're trying to grow it, and you're trying to scale it and bring it to other environments. So talk a little bit about how you do that. So less so what you guys are doing inside of your facility, but how you're bringing this to other businesses. What does that look like?
Yeah, so much of this is because I feel like we're kind of early to this space. Is just awareness for so many people, because what's a little bit deceiving in this this industry is so many people right now, they're coming and asking for personal training. So a lot of coaches are looking for more personal training stuff. But what we're seeing is, as we're making this more aware for people, is we're getting a lot of senior trainers taking this course because they're like, I've taken as many exercise courses as I can. I need to learn more on the behavior side. And so when we start talking to coaches through it and they go through the course, then it's kind of taking the individual approach. It's like, how does this work for you and the facility that you're working in, the clientele that you're working in, the certain price model that you're kind of doing right now, because you want this to kind of fit in. You don't want this to stand out as like something that just seems very odd and different, of like how you fit it in. Because like I like it in at my facility because it's built into our monthly membership. And so we're helping some places do that, but we're also helping some that already do some nutrition. I'm like, perfect. You already have the room set up for this. You already have people kind of coming in and going over nutrition. So now we're just going to add on more coaching to this. So it's not just focusing on what they do nutrition wise. It might be focused on what they're doing to enhance what they're nutrition wise, but also just coaching their overall fitness journey, which overall, that's what's going to make them happy long term.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're operating in both the role of an educator and then also a business consultant to a certain degree in some cases.
Yeah, so everyone that's going through a course, like, and I just love to talk to coaches because we're getting people from all over the world that's taking it now, and just kind of seeing where they're at, seeing where their pain points are, seeing where the clientele is, and helping them kind of mold it into what fits for them. Because just like working one-on-one with the client in the gym, this is kind of a one-on-one with coaches and trainers too, because yes, we need this base level of education to know how to have the conversations and set it up, but then also after that, figuring out how it fits best into your current model.
Dr. J, you're the psychology professional here. So you've came into our world to deliver this education, which to Scott's point, we vastly need.
Yeah.
What has been some of the biggest barriers you've encountered to trying to actually get this implemented?
Oh, interesting question, right? Yeah, I mean, coming into this space, I mean, fitness and all of those has always been a personal passion of mine, and obviously something I paid attention to. And I kind of joke that I used to watch, all the Richard Simmons stuff, and like he went with Deal a Meal, and I was like, this is brilliant behavior science, like in action. And for those of you that are too young to familiar to YouTube that, it's entertaining as all get out. But there was really some core behavior principles even back then in there. It's just not stuck. So I think one of the most frustrating things is, well, I have probably two. One is that this just isn't talked about. It's very dichotomous. It's the clients aren't compliant, or we need more information on this. And this information to implementation gap is so large, and our clients are walking in with more and more information, but how to implement it in their life is the gap. So the fact that this isn't just, we just got back from some conferences last several months, and it's just not on the docket. Yeah. I spoke at one, but other than that, it's just really not on the docket. And I'm thinking, wow, it's such a foundational piece. Yeah. So for me, that just gap in people, because as Scott said, we're early to the table on this, just meaning that people just, wait a minute, behavior science, change, like even just having explained that and them not realizing there is a whole scientific base that has such a long history, and we use it in everything, paychecks, speeding tickets, the way that many of our political and even just government organizational structures, all these things are set up, are using this as a cornerstone of society. So I'm just like, why aren't we doing that? The other frustration is this 30-day challenge notion, and it doesn't have to be 30-day, but it's the way that we're marketing fitness, because we're actually undoing, in my opinion, in many ways, what we actually want to happen for, as you pointed out, coaches as to have a successful and fulfilling career. We're sabotaging that with that. And then we're also setting expectations that aren't accurate or clear. And it's not just in the fitness industry. I see all over the place 21-day habits and all of these things. And you don't really develop a habit in 21 days. And that's a whole nother conversation, right? But I'm seeing some of this very much like and I understand marketing. You have to get people's attention. You got to hit a pain point. So I completely understand the source of that. But we've got to start changing the language, the vernacular around that, because then clients are expecting something immediate. But yet when they come to us, we know it's not going to happen that fast. And then we're also frustrated because clients aren't staying, or they're asking for things that are not reasonable. And then people get burned out because, again, if they're associating these physical results with their acumen and their ability. So I think those would be two that have been two of the most notable for me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. We are to a great extent creating the very thing we're trying to prevent with the 30-day challenge. It's that instant gratification mentality that, you're right, it sells very well from a marketing perspective and it gets them through the door, but it never keeps them. And it's just this revolving door. I mean, it's a separate conversation from a business perspective of how much harder it is to acquire a new client than it is to retain an existing client. And, this is not just, and I want to put this out to our audience, what we're talking about here is not just purely a methodology to coach behavior change more effectively. It is, but it's also an effective strategy for a sustainable business, because to the point you made earlier, Dr. J, this is, making small incremental changes over time. And if you set that expectation up from a business perspective without even realizing it, you're setting up that client to work with you for a longer period of time instead of, fly high and then crash and burn.
And one of the interesting things to me that I talk about a lot is that I feel like a lot of fitness professionals have come from an athletic background. Mm-hmm. And many, of course, think it's very logical that they're sports psychologists. Mm-hmm. And what do sports psychologists do, right? They work on sort of that mental facet of performance. Yep. But yet in our day-to-day practices, we're not really thinking that way. And they're all humans. They're just on a continuum of physical performance and other things. So,
man, like there's so many other questions I want to ask, but we always try to keep the podcast to like a reasonable length of time for people. So I have a feeling that I'm going to be bringing both of you guys back on at some point in the future to do some sort of part 2 to dive into these things deeper. But, before we bring this to a close, and I'll throw this question to both of you just for kind of a quick thought, but if there was one thing each of you could have our audience take away from this discussion from your different perspectives, what would it be? Scott, let's go with you first.
Yeah, so the biggest shift that we're talking about, and I want people to start thinking about is going beyond the physical. So we're so used to like, okay, someone's going to come in, I'm in charge of them for that hour, and I'll see them twice a week, but that's it. And so thinking of, I want to be their fitness guide for what they're doing inside and outside the gym. And again, that doesn't mean that they need to be the expert in everything. It's someone that's thinking of like the head coach, and you have all these assistant coaches doing all the different things.
Love it.
What are you going to be in charge of? If you're not comfortable with nutrition, cool, refer that out to someone else. You don't even have to be doing the physical side. I see people in the future just doing this as the coach, where they're just meeting and talking with people and they're overseeing someone's plan, because people love having someone that looks at everything, because right now there's so many different pieces. They might have a chiropractor, or they might have a physical therapist or massage therapist or a personal trainer or whatever it is, but they're all kind of doing their own thing and not working in conjunction. If you can be that person that is connecting all the dots, so person is getting the most out of the experience, you're going to be very valuable. So you're going to have a very good career, and those clients are going to love you. So start thinking broader with your clients on coaching their whole fitness journey.
Yeah, this is the quarterback of the multidisciplinary team, so to speak. Dr. J, how about from your standpoint?
And I would say that if someone's listening to this and thinking, well, that's not why I got into fitness, is because to do all of this emotional psyche stuff, I just really wanted to train people. I would say 2 things. I think you got into this field, I'm hoping, because you like to help people. Yeah. Right. Like, I think this would be a really rough job if you didn't like people in general. And so if helping people was part of the reason that you got in, you most definitely can do this. And it doesn't require that deep level of, like I talked about before, psych understanding. It's not a conversation that's being had in a lot of places that you probably spent time. So it seems odd. It seems different. It seems outside of maybe your skill set. But again, I want to emphasize, and I can speak from this personally, I've been training people to do this for decades, and it doesn't require an extensive background in anything in particular, other than I care about people and I'm willing to think about things slightly different and use different terms to get to the outcome that I want. So I would encourage people to understand that this is very attainable as adding this to your coaching practice.
Yeah. Great. Yes, it is broadening the perspective, and it is creating awareness around this. And that's why I was so excited to have this conversation, because, the more people that are speaking this language and the more this message proliferates, hopefully the more you're not the only person at a conference that's lecturing on this. And, we've got, 50 different ways to do a HIIT workout, but, only one way to coach behavior change. So guys, where can people go if they want to find out more about all this great work that you're doing?
Yeah, we got a couple different spots. Like if you just go to our website, healthybehaviorinstitute.com, we have some free resources there on client compliance and how to add this to your business. You can also find us on your major podcast or on YouTube. We do Becoming the Ultimate Coach with the Jock and the Doc, and we have about 50 different episodes, about 10, 15 minutes long, just breaking down different parts. So really, getting into the details of all these different aspects and different client examples and different fitness trends and all those things. So there's a couple ways there.
Awesome. And I will link up to that in the show notes page so everyone has a chance to check that out, because this work that you're doing is really meaningful and really important. And the fact that you're providing some value to the industry, by doing a conversation like this and putting all those resources out there, we definitely want people to have access to those. Before I let you guys go, I've never actually asked this final question to two people at the same time. So I'll ask it to both of you. And this is actually kind of a neat way to ask it, because I'm asking it to someone who's a fitness professional and then someone who's more of an allied health or a medical professional. And it's around the wellness paradox. And for me, that's the trust, communication, and interaction gap between fitness professionals and the medical community. To the fitness professional first, and then to the allied health professional second, if you can give fitness professionals one piece of advice to close off that gap, what would it be?
So anybody that your current clients are working with in that medical space, reach out to. Like we talked about that earlier, about developing those relationships for two ways. Like one, if I have a good communication with someone that's their doctor or chiropractor or whatever it is, and the client has good results with them, that gives me someone to refer to another client that's having the same issue. It's also a way that fitness, the allied professional, was like, wow, this trainer actually seems what they know, what they're talking about. They're getting good results with their clients. I like the questions they're asking. So they seem like a very competent person. So I will refer people to them. So my biggest thing is just with your current clientele, just start having conversations with who they're already working with and building that.
And in one of my iterations professionally, I actually was part of a multidisciplinary kind of the allied professionals type of group. And the biggest thing that I would recommend to anyone do, and it served us well when we were doing it, is learn each other's vocabulary. Not all of it, but to a degree. If another professional says something about compliance, ask them what they mean by that. Make sure that you understand. It is fascinating how many different fields of expertise use some terms, but they mean different things in those fields. And so much of the miscommunication or misinterpretation come from an assumption that we're all speaking, I don't know, regular English, so it must all translate. And the only time I don't know what they're talking about is when they use a fancy word I'm not familiar with. That's not true. We use a lot of commonly used words that actually truly represent different things. And so by being just very generous in that, hey, I just want to make sure I am not a physical therapist, or I'm not a this, and I just want to make sure, can you walk me through what that looks like in your profession, in your field? And when you have those moments to do that, the clarity that comes about, because they're also assuming some of the ways that you speak, they're interpreting it different. They're hearing it from a different paradigm or from a different health paradigm. And so having that conversation and just working on that, and you'll be blown away by the impact that makes.
Yeah, such great advice from both of you guys. Dr. J, Scott, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thanks for having us on.
Yes, thank you so much. We enjoyed it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 70. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next week, please be well.